At this stage of life, you've lived long enough to recognize the difference between what shines briefly and what endures. The long view strips illusion away. Applause that once sounded thunderous fades into memory. Possessions that once felt essential quietly lose their authority. Titles once worn like armor eventually loosen their grip. What remains is simpler, sturdier, and far more honest. Character remains. Relationships remain. The quiet knowledge of having lived in alignment with your values remains. Socrates observed or told us that the unexamined life is not worth living. This was never a call for endless self-criticism, but for honest reflection. With decades behind you, examination no longer wounds. It clarifies. You see patterns where once you saw only events. You recognize that what once felt like failure was instruction, and what once felt like delay was often protection or preparation. This revelation does not arrive like a lightning strike. It settles in gradually, like autumn light at the end of a long day, softer, steadier, more forgiving than the sharp glare of youth. You begin to see that the years you thought were wasted were often laying foundations beneath the surface. Loss taught discernment, struggle taught humility, responsibility taught endurance. The story makes sense now, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. You no longer judge your life by how impressive it appears from the outside, but by how true it feels on the inside. This is the awakening of wisdom, the moment when truth becomes more valuable than approval, and meaning more satisfying than momentum. The decades behind you have given gifts that cannot be rushed, purchased, or borrowed. You've learned patience not as an idea, but as survival. You waited through seasons when answers refused to arrive. You endured uncertainty, responsibility, and disappointment, and learned that time itself is a teacher to those willing to stay present. Isaac Newton reflected that, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." With age, you realize you are both the climber and the shoulders. You stand upon your own past mistakes, lessons, and mentors. What once felt like stumbling stones have become elevation. You've learned discernment by being wrong often enough to recognize truth when it stands quietly before you. You understand, as only experience can teach, that people matter more than outcomes, and meaning outlasts speed. You've watched fast success collapse and slow effort endure. You've seen relationships outlive ambitions, and integrity outlast opportunity. Marcus Aurelius wrote that time is a river made up of the events which happen, and a violent stream. For as soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away. Years teach you not to chase the river, but to stand firmly on its bank, choosing carefully where to step and what to. The years have carved depth into you the way weather shapes stone, slowly, relentlessly, and with purpose. This is wisdom earned, not borrowed. It is quiet confidence, not loud certainty, and it belongs to you alone. With this perspective comes a new kind of freedom. You are no longer compelled to prove yourself. The hunger for validation weakens, replaced by a desire for alignment. You've earned the right to choose substance over spectacle, depth over display, and truth over trend. Napoleon Hill reminded us that strength and growth come only through continuous effort and struggle. In later years, this effort is no longer frantic striving, but deliberate focus. You channel energy wisely, understanding that fewer commitments, chosen well, yield greater impact. Decisions can now be guided by clarity rather than fear. You understand consequences not as theories but as lived experience. This season offers an opportunity the younger cannot yet grasp, to act without illusion, to contribute without ego, and to invest energy only where it truly matters. You may find yourself drawn toward mentoring, creating, or simplifying. Not because you are retreating, but because you finally see what deserves your attention. Like a seasoned craftsman, you no longer rush the work. Your hands know what they are doing. Your judgment is steady. Your presence carries weight. This is the perspective advantage, the ability to see beyond immediacy and recognize what will still matter when the noise has faded. The legacy you've been building, knowingly or not, can now be shaped with intention. Legacy is not only what you leave behind, it is how you show up now. It is found in the stories you pass on, the patience you demonstrate, and the standards you quietly uphold. Carl Jung reflected that the afternoon of life must also have a significance of its own, and cannot be merely a pitiful appendage to life's morning. This is not a time of decline, but of integration, bringing together all you have been, learned, and endured into something coherent and meaningful. Unfinished dreams may not need restarting, only refining. Some ambitions were never meant to be achieved exactly as imagined, but transformed into wisdom shared or guidance given. The harvest of your years is ready, not to be admired, but to be offered. You may offer it through counsel, example, service, or quiet leadership. The form matters less than the intention. What matters is that the wisdom does not remain locked within you. A tree bears fruit, not for itself, but for those who come near. Albert Einstein once said that try not to become a man of success, but rather try to become a man of value. With a long view, value becomes clearer than success. Value endures. Value multiplies through others. Value becomes legacy. And so the long view leads naturally to a deeper question. Not what you achieved, but what it all means. When the years are seen as chapters rather than races, life reveals its true invitation, not to accumulate endlessly, but to complete wisely. The next chapter is not about becoming more, it is about becoming whole. The deeper understanding arrives quietly, not with fanfare, but with certainty. Meaning is not found in accumulation, but in alignment. You've lived long enough to see full cycles, beginnings that promised everything and endings that clarified what truly mattered. You now understand that life is not a straight climb measured by height alone, but a series of seasons measured by depth. The first half asks you to build, strive, and endure. This second mountain asks something more refined, to interpret what you've lived, to complete what was begun, and to give what has been earned. Leo Tolstoy once reflected that the sole meaning of life is to serve humanity. In later years, this thought stops sounding idealistic and begins sounding practical. After decades of pursuit, service becomes the natural expression of understanding. It is not self-sacrifice, but self-fulfillment. The harvest of your years is not measured only in achievements, but in understanding. You've gathered stories that no resume could hold, lessons learned in boardrooms and kitchens, in quiet mornings and sleepless nights. You know which battles matter and which drain the spirit without reward. You've learned that not every argument deserves your voice, and not every opportunity deserves your time. You've learned resilience through loss, through doors that closed and people who did not stay. You've learned humility through success, discovering that triumph can be as instructive as defeat. You've learned compassion through your own mistakes, realizing how easily judgment fades once you recognize yourself in others. Like a seasoned craftsman, your hands now move with assurance. You measure twice, cut once, and waste little effort. Aristotle observed that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. With age, habits reveal their true power. You see how small, repeated choices shaped your character more than grand intentions ever did. The harvest before you is the sum of those choices patiently made over decades. This harvest is not something to display. It is something to distribute. Wisdom hoarded turns stale. Wisdom shared multiplies. The world needs what you've learned. Younger generations bring energy, speed, and optimism, but they often lack context. You carry something rarer: perspective. You've seen how decisions ripple outward, how shortcuts exact their price later, and how patience often outperforms force. You can see consequences before they unfold because you've lived through them already. Your contribution may not be loud. It may arrive through quiet counsel, steady presence, or thoughtful restraint. You may guide without commanding, teach without preaching, and lead without insisting on credit. In a world often rushing, without direction, your steadiness becomes an anchor. Marcus Aurelius wrote that what we do now echoes in eternity. Time has taught you that influence is not measured by visibility, but by continuity. What you pass on, values, judgment, restraint, continues long after applause fades. This is your unique authority. It was not granted, it was earned. No one else has walked your exact path or gathered your precise combination of lessons. That makes your contribution irreplaceable. Completion is not about finishing everything on a list. It is about bringing life full circle. It means reconciling what was with what is, and making peace with a pattern that only hindsight reveals. The sharp edges of regret soften when seen as teachers rather than verdicts. Triumphs humble themselves into gratitude once you see how much help, timing, and chance played a role. You begin to understand that nothing was entirely wasted. Even the detours carried instruction. Even the pain carved capacity. Wholeness arrives when you stop wishing certain chapters away and instead acknowledge that every chapter shaped the one you are now living. Carl Jung believed that the afternoon of life must also have a significance of its own and cannot be merely a pitiful appendage to life's morning. This is the season of integration. You are no longer trying to become someone else. You are becoming more fully yourself, bringing coherence to all you have lived. In this completion, there is relief. The need to explain yourself fades. The need to compete dissolves. What remains is acceptance, and with it, quiet strength. At this season of life, urgency exists without panic. You understand time's value precisely because you've seen it pass. Clarity sharpens intention. You no longer confuse motion with progress or noise with importance. The lasting impact you create now may be quieter, but it will be deeper. Legacy is shaped less by what you achieve and more by how you live now, how you listen, how you advise, how you respond when you could react. By choosing intention over impulse, wisdom over pride, and meaning over recognition, you leave behind more than memories. You leave guidance. Napoleon Hill taught that a man's real measure of wealth is what he would be worth if he lost all his money. In later years, this truth becomes unmistakable. What remains, character, insight, influence, is the real inheritance you offer the world. Albert Einstein reminded us that try not to become a man of success, but rather try to become a man of value. Value endures beyond timelines. It moves quietly from one life to another, shaping futures you may never see, yet profoundly influence. This is the wisdom imperative. The world does not need you to relive your past, but to translate it. Not to relaunch yourself, but to complete yourself. The chapters you've written have brought you here, to perhaps the most meaningful chapter yet, not an ending, but a fulfillment.